Hey, welcome to our Beyond Sunday podcast this week as we have our next conversation from the green room. Glad you're joining us as we continue to dive into a little deeper look at the sermon from this past Sunday. This past Sunday, we were in John chapter 6, the very end of the chapter, where Jesus is saying some very hard things to his followers that make a lot of them abandon him. And one of the things that he discusses that I want to focus on for this podcast episode is at the very end of John chapter 6 in verses 70 through 71, Jesus makes this very curious statement about Judas. And it's one of the more interesting statements that Jesus makes, I think, in his whole ministry, because I think it poses an interesting question that I want to ask. So let me first read the two verses, and then I'll ask the question. John chapter 6, verses 70 through 71, Jesus says, "Did I not choose you, the 12?" He's talking to the 12 apostles, the 12 disciples. He says, "Did I not choose you, the 12? And yet one of you is a devil." He spoke of Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, for he, one of the 12, was going to betray him. Jesus says this in context of his teaching at the end of John 6 that a lot of people get upset about, and they leave Jesus and they don't follow him anymore, as Jesus is talking about how sovereign he is, and he's talking about how he's sovereign over salvation. And part of that conversation, Jesus, in discussing his sovereignty, is talking about part of that is that he knows men's hearts. He knows exactly who they are and what they are without having to look at what they do. He knows their heart. He knows them even better than they know them. And in the context of him explaining how well he knows his disciples, he says, "I'll tell you exactly how well I know you. I know one of you is going to betray me. I know one of you is, your heart is far from me." And he points out Judas. And so the big question that I want to dive into, that I personally find a very interesting question, is why did Jesus choose Judas to be one of the 12 if he knew Judas's heart and he knew Judas was going to betray him? Why did he choose him? Was it a mistake? Did Jesus mess up? Well, of course he didn't mess up. Jesus doesn't make mistakes, and Jesus didn't learn this information about Judas. As we just said, he's sovereign. He knows it all. He knew Judas's heart, and he knew Judas was going to betray him, and yet he chose Judas anyway. So why is it that he called Judas to follow him if he knew that all along? Well, I think there are two really simple answers to this question that are simple but very profound. The first reason why I think Jesus chose Judas, in spite of Judas's heart not to follow Jesus, is to fulfill the Old Testament messianic prophecies about Jesus. In other words, Jesus chooses Judas because the Old Testament said he was going to choose Judas as a sign to prove that he was in fact the Messiah. He chooses Judas to betray him as a verification, as a validation for all of us that he is in fact the Messiah, because he fulfills all the Old Testament messianic prophecies. And you say, well, what in the world is that about? Well, let me show you. In Psalm 41 is a messianic prophecy. It's a psalm about the future Messiah and what's going to happen. And it says in Psalm 41:9, listen to this about the future Messiah. It says of him, "Even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me." There is so much in this one verse in Psalm 41:9 that is amazing. First thing I want to point out is it's talking about the Messiah is going to be betrayed. Okay, Judas fulfills that prophecy, right? And so Jesus chooses Judas to betray him, in effect. He chooses one of the 12 intentionally to be one that will not follow him, intentionally for the purpose of betraying him, so that Jesus fulfills this prophecy that he'll be betrayed by one of those that are following him. Not only that, but notice the specificity of this messianic prophecy. It doesn't name Judas by name, but it says, "He ate my bread." And then you go to the night Jesus was betrayed. And do you remember how Jesus reveals which one of the 12 is going to betray him? You remember in John 6, he doesn't say which one it is. He just says it's Judas that's going to betray, but he doesn't reveal that to the other disciples. The night he's betrayed, he reveals it's Judas. How? By saying, the one who dips his bread in the cup with me is the one who's going to betray me. It's literally in the supper, sharing the bread, that he reveals Judas is the one as he's sharing the bread with Jesus. And the prophecy in Psalm 41 is exactly that. Even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me. The other thing I want to point out that this prophecy says, there's so many layers here. It says, my close friend in whom I trusted. Judas, in many ways, was the most trusted apostle, the most trusted of the 12. You say, well, why in the world would you say that? You remember what Judas's job was? He was the treasurer of the bunch. He was the one who held the money for the group, the one who was responsible for keeping track of the money, spending the money, collecting the money. He was the one responsible for taking care of the money. What kind of person do you choose to take care of your money? Do you choose somebody that you trust a lot, or do you choose somebody that you trust a little to take care of your money? If you're in an organization and you're electing a treasurer, do you choose somebody who you think is going to backstab you, somebody that you're suspicious of, or do you choose somebody who's trustworthy? You choose somebody who's trustworthy. Jesus chose Judas to be one of the 12, and they chose Judas specifically to be the one who handles the money for the group, meaning he was well trusted. And this fulfills this prophecy that he was a close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me. And this, by the way, the first messianic prophecy that occurs in the Old Testament, do you know where it is? It's in Genesis chapter 3, where where God is talking to Adam and Eve about their sin and how they've fallen. And there's this prophecy that's given in the curses when he's cursing Adam and he's cursing Eve, and he curses the serpent. Remember, who's the serpent? The serpent is the devil, right? And he says in this prophecy, in these curses, he gives this prophecy that the serpent will strike at his heel, the future Messiah, but the Messiah will crush his head with his heel. And Jesus does this very interesting, or the psalmist does this very interesting play on that prophecy, where he says that this close friend of the Messiah, in whom the Messiah trusts, puts trust in to be we know to be the money keeper for the disciples, who ate his bread at the supper, lifted his heel against him. He tries to crush the head of the Messiah, but it's the Messiah who crushes the head of the serpent. And what's interesting about that is in John 6, where Jesus talks about this, he connects all of this together when he says that he is a devil. He's going all the way back to Genesis 3, and he's calling that, connecting it with the Psalm 41 prophecy of the Messiah and this betrayer. Oh, it's so beautiful, all the theology that's wrapped up in that one verse in Psalm 41, and Jesus is connecting it all in John chapter 6 when he says that one of these apostles, one of these 12 is a devil, and one of these is going to betray him. He's connecting all of that together. And it even is bigger than that. If we leave Psalm 41 and we go into Zechariah chapter 11, I won't read it for time's sake, but in Zechariah chapter 11, we have another messianic prophecy that is laying out specifically what's going to happen to the Messiah when he's betrayed. And the prophecy in Zechariah 11 is strikingly specific in that it gives the prophecy that he will be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Who is it that betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver? Of course, it's Judas Iscariot. And so what we see is Jesus chooses Judas because he knows that Judas's heart is against him, because he knows that Judas will betray him, because he knows that Judas will be trusted with the money, because he knows that Judas will betray him for 30 pieces of silver, because he knows that Judas will celebrate the supper with him and then turn around just hours later and turn him over to Pilate. He knows that's all going to happen. And because he knows all that's going to happen, in his sovereignty, he chooses Judas for that purpose of validating that he is fulfilling all Old Testament prophecies, that he is, in fact, I am. Oh, it's amazing to me. So that's the first reason why Jesus chose Judas, to fulfill the Old Testament messianic prophecies of the Old Testament. The second reason why Jesus chooses Judas, even though he knew Judas's heart and knew that Judas would betray him, is because the cross was God's plan all along. When Jesus is betrayed by Judas, Jesus isn't upset. He's not worried. Jesus isn't going, oh no, this can't happen. He is doing it to fulfill all righteousness. He's doing it because the cross was the plan. Again, all the way back to Genesis chapter 3. The prophecy is that the Messiah is going to come to crush the head of the serpent, to liberate mankind from the curse of sin. And there's only one way he can do that. There's only one way he can crush the head of the serpent. There's only one way he can bring victory to us that are cursed in sin. And that is by his death, through his resurrection. And so he has to die. And so he has to be betrayed. And so he invites Judas in, not just to fulfill Old Testament messianic prophecies to prove he is the Messiah, the great I am, but to actually accomplish the mission. The mission was not to make everyone happy or to make everyone comfortable or to make everyone feel good. The mission was to provide forgiveness from sins. And so he had to go to the cross. The cross is not plan B. The cross was plan A. And if the cross is plan A, that means Jesus must choose Judas. He must choose a betrayer to bring him into the collection of the 12 so that he could accomplish the mission. Here's how Acts chapter 4, verses 27 through 28 says it. He says, "For truly in this city there were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your plan had predestined to take place." It was always the plan. Judas didn't go rogue. The title of the sermon Sunday was, God is offensively sovereign. That I am is offensively sovereign. That Jesus was claiming his sovereignty so aggressively that it's offensive to us. Here's an offensive statement of sovereignty when we talk about the sovereignty of God. God is so sovereign, he sovereignly chooses to use our sinful choices to bring about his glory. Now, don't mistake anything that I just said there. I'm not saying God sins. I'm not saying Jesus sins. He doesn't sin. He is perfect, but he's so sovereign that he can use our sinful choices, our sinful actions to accomplish his good and perfect plan. God's so sovereign, he's not worried that we're going to sin so much that it's going to take away his power or his ability. Nope, he can actually incorporate our sin into his plan that accomplishes his purpose. So when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, God wasn't stressed. He wasn't worried. He's like, no, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to incorporate this sin into my redemptive plan to redeem the world. And just like that, when Judas messes up and Judas betrays Jesus, Jesus doesn't freak out. He's like, yep, this is exactly part of the plan. This is how I'm going to redeem the world. And this is how I'm going to redeem my people. And so this plan is part of God's sovereign plan all along. And in that passage there at the end, we get this interesting contrast then between one of the faithful disciples and Judas, who's the unfaithful disciple. And it's interesting that Peter is the one that's pointed out because Peter, you remember at the end, also has a falling. He commits sin as well, just like Judas does. He has his own betrayal of Jesus, where Peter famously denies Jesus over and over and over again the night he's betrayed by Judas. Peter also has that falling out. But there's a difference between the two. And Peter, I don't think it's a coincidence, is the one who's pointed out who, when Jesus asks the question, are y'all all going to leave me? Are you going to betray me too, just like this crowd? Judas stays silent, but it's Peter who speaks up. And Peter says, where are we going to go? And so you have this contrast between Peter speaking up in faith, saying, we're not abandoning you, Jesus. And we have Judas in his silence, as Jesus points out, he's the betrayer. And we see this contrast because Peter trusts in Jesus. Peter believed that Jesus was the only hope. But Judas is selfish, and Judas is temporary, and Judas has no use for Jesus when Jesus becomes no use for him. And so you see this contrast between Peter and Judas there that I think is really striking and really beautiful, the way the narrative is written by John. So I want to close out by giving you a couple of warnings. What's some practical application that we can learn from this? A couple of warnings that I can give you from Judas and the story of Judas in particular, about how Jesus chooses him to be one of the disciples. The first warning I have for you from the story of Judas is, don't mistake proximity to Jesus for salvation. Don't mistake proximity to Jesus for salvation. Judas was close to Jesus. He was in the proximity of Jesus. He was in the 12, the group of 12, but he wasn't saved. He was a devil, as Jesus calls him. You can be among the people of God, but not actually be the people of God. You can go to church and still be lost. Judas was called a disciple. He was called a follower, but he wasn't. So don't mistake proximity or closeness to Jesus with actually having salvation. Second warning that we learn from Judas is, you can only fake it for so long. Judas was faking it. Jesus knew Judas was faking it, but Judas was faking it. And eventually, one of the lessons from Judas is, you can only fake it so long. Eventually, your sinful heart is going to come out and be exposed. Be careful if you're hiding sins. If you think you can get away with it, if you think you can hold on to things in your life that you think nobody else knows about, nobody else is ever going to find out. I've seen time and time again, over and over and over, in my own life, in other people's lives, your sin is going to be exposed one day. It's not going to remain a secret for forever. And the longer you lie to yourself, thinking that you can hide your sin, the deeper and deeper in that sin you're going to get. And so don't pretend that you can hide it or you can fake it. You can only fake it so long. Judas faked it for a long time. He faked it for years, but eventually his false following of Jesus was found out. Eventually he gave in. Eventually his betrayal became public, and his heart, the reality of his heart, was exposed. So, first of all, warning, don't mistake proximity to Jesus for salvation from Jesus. 2, you can only fake it for so long. Don't think you can hide your sin. Confess it, repent of it, turn from it, flee from it. And third is, religious activity is no substitute for actually having a saving relationship with Jesus. Judas had religious activity. He was a disciple of Jesus. He was numbered with the 12. He was in the in group, and yet he did not have a saving relationship with Jesus. Church without Jesus is not worth your time. If you go to church just to fulfill religious activities, but you don't have a relationship with Jesus, it's a waste of your time. Church only matters and has significance if you are actually in relationship with Jesus. Now, I'm not telling you don't come to church. I'm just telling you church won't benefit you if you don't have a walk with Jesus. Church is not going to improve your life. Church is not going to make you happier. At the end of the day, you need Jesus. And the purpose of church is to just help you grow in your relationship with Christ. But church without Jesus is nothing of significance. Jesus is what matters. Having a relationship with him is what matters. And I hope that AlomaChurch helps you in your walk with Christ and helps you grow in your relationship with Christ. But if you don't have a relationship with Christ, all of this is pointless. So I want you to know Jesus, because that's what matters. Don't be a Judas where you're in the fellowship for years and you come to the end of it all and you realize you never had a relationship with the one who really mattered. Don't have a relationship with your pastor and not have a relationship with Jesus. Don't have a relationship with your deacon, but not have a relationship with Jesus. Don't have a relationship with your life group leader and not have a relationship with Jesus. He's the one that matters. He's the one that gives life. He is the one who can give your life purpose. The last closing thought I want to give you is this, is just a reminder that Judas spent 3 years with Jesus and he was completely lost. He was a devil. After spending 3 years personally with Jesus, Jesus called him a devil. Peter repeatedly failed over and over again. Peter famously fails, not just at the end with the denials, but Peter fails all the time. Throughout the story of the Gospels, we see Peter messing up. The contrast between Peter and Judas is striking. Peter has a relationship with Christ. And at the end, we see what that does. Peter, when he fails, turns, repents, comes back to Jesus, and his fellowship is unbroken. Judas, when he betrays, is pierced with guilt. He ultimately commits suicide because of the guilt that found no satisfaction and no healing. So at the end of the day, following Jesus and having a relationship with him is not about being perfect. It's not having your life together. It's not about having even a good reputation. It's about having a relationship with him and knowing that your faith means that you have forgiveness from sins and you are accepted and welcomed by him, and you can be washed clean of every mistake because he had a plan sovereignly to die on a cross for your sins and rise from the dead. And that knowledge changes everything. So I hope you can rest in the sovereignty of God. I hope you can rest in the plan of the cross. And I hope you can rest in knowing that your eternal salvation rests solely in your relationship with him and nothing else. God bless you. Hope you have a great week. I'll see you next time.